podcast audience. Welcome to Three Peas in a Podcast, episode 211.
Wow, we made it. I didn't know if we were going to make it through that introduction.
Well,
I didn't either. It was like you decided to change
well,
it.
I know it's in parentheses. I didn't know whether I should say it or not.
Okay, all right.
This is a podcast, not
Cast.
yes.
That is true.
That's right. So
That's just us being cute.
it is. We're so cute.
We're cute.
Look at us. How cute are
just
we?
before I'm sure Charlie cuts in, I was sitting like this. We were talking,
Aw,
and I realized
that's a little too familiar, man.
Well, Charlie had told me earlier today that this chair makes me look less awkward.
Anything we can
That's
do to
a
help
great-
that.
That's a great chair, then.
I thought to myself, I doubt that.
It's a magic chair.
Oh boy. Okay. So last week I said to the audience that we were going to go off script just a tad, and we're going to make up our own question. What we're actually going to do? We're going to create a new segment.
Oh.
What's wrong?
The segment is what is wrong with that? What is wrong with that? And then we're going to talk about a topic.
All
Okay,
right, here
I
we
like it,
go.
Jason.
What is wrong? with
And if you don't like this segment or this entire episode, please send in a question.
Yes.
We do not have
exactly.
questions. This is what happens when we don't have questions.
We invent things.
This is my subtle way to goad people to send us
More
questions.
questions.
I like it. I
Just
like it.
Do
I'm
a
with you.
really crappy episode,
There
and
you
then
go.
they'll go,
It might be good.
we've got to
Could
fix
turn
it.
out to be their favorite thing.
It might be. We'll
Might
see.
be.
So, all right. So, since we're talking about this topic these days around Community Christian, but we admit that not a lot of churches talk about it.
Mhm.
What's wrong with the church in mental health? Why don't they do it right or do it at all? What's wrong with them?
Yes.
And why are we so right? Because that's what matters.
That's what Jason wants to get to.
How'd we get to be so good?
How are we so amazing?
So I
Let's
guess,
look at it.
I guess let's start with why
I
do you,
almost put my arm back up. I was just going to lean
You
in.
look so
I was
comfortable,
going to
yeah.
lean in.
You look so comfortable.
So Jason, what do you think is the first thing that
Makes
most
us right.
yeah
Yeah.
what makes us what do you
Well-
think, what's the first thing that you think is or the most egregious I'll say problem that many Christians
Yeah.
often take when it comes to mental health? Is it the fact that we often just don't talk about it enough, or is there
Yeah.
something else even before that?
Well, they either, I think, one of two things, and you can just argue over which is worse. They either ignore it like it don't exist, or they discount it like, well, that might be the same thing. But you know what I'm saying? They just ignore it and don't want to talk about it at all. Or when it does sort of come into play and people are struggling with their mental health, we over spiritualize.
That's what I was going to say. I think there's a lot
Those
of
are the
spirit-
two things I was
I
thinking.
think there's over spiritualization around mental health.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Why do you think it is that Christians want to over spiritualize it, or churches in general want to over spiritualize mental health problems? In particular, I guess what we're talking about, maybe to make clear for people when we're talking about mental health problems. There's obviously a wide range, but in particular, most people are struggling with some form of anxiety,
Yeah.
depression, right? Those kind of things people are bringing in
Mhm.
to a situation, right? These are probably the most common things most
Mhm.
people are struggling with. They come to a church,
Mhm.
and the church, what does it sound like when the church over spiritualizes it?
Well, it sounds like blame.
Okay.
In my opinion. It sounds like, because, let's be clear, mental health problems like you just described, the way they play themselves out in real life is in behaviors.
Right.
And I
Right.
think the church is real clear on, well, you just need to behave. And so
Right.
if, like for instance, if you're depressed and you're struggling to get out of bed in the morning, you just need to get out of bed in the morning.
That's right.
And they don't realize that there could most likely going to be things behind that. And even, especially when you understand trauma,
Right.
and you're a trauma-informed person, you understand that a lot of what you see in the behavior of people is not necessarily just laziness or just I just don't want to.
Right.
There really is some kind of physical thing going on,
Mm-hmm.
stemming from a mental issue going on that
Mhm.
needs to be addressed so that piece can get healed. And so we just say things that, I don't think people are trying to be insensitive,
Right.
but they come off that way,
That's right.
especially to somebody who, and I talked about this a few weeks ago when I preached on this idea, and I said, in the message, I said something like, whenever you just live in the reality of your mental illness, nobody intends to do that. Nobody,
Right.
nobody.
No one chose. I
nobody
want to
chose
be
that.
in this place.
Nobody. I haven't met anybody yet that decided one day I want to hate myself so much and hate my life so
Mhm.
much that I'm going to self-harm or think about suicide or even
Right.
go all the way and try to attempt it. Nobody sets out there. They start out with just living in a situation where that they just see the world and see reality in a way that makes sense
Right.
to them. I was working with somebody one time who had a family member who took their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that is so hard for family members who have people in their world like that is they cannot understand how you get to a place where that seemed like the logical thing to do, because we know, sitting on this side of, when you look at suicide from this angle, you see it as so destructive and so
Right.
damaging to the family and the people who love them, and if there are children involved, if it's a parent, and we see that so clearly. But when you flip around and you see it from the other person's perspective, and I tell them this all the time, I said, they are firmly convinced that this is better for everyone,
Right.
or else they wouldn't take this. They're not evil. They just have a distorted view of the world. And the only way to help somebody change that distortion is you can't stand face to face with them and say, fix it, think differently. You have to figure out a way to come around and sit beside them
Right.
Mm-hmm.
and say, I know what it looks like. I'm looking at the same thing too, but let me tell you what I see. And let's walk together and try to figure this out together. That's the only shot you've got.
Mm-hmm.
So I say all that to say, answer your question. I think the church too often comes face to face with people, and we try to tell people what to do
Mm-hmm.
rather than walk with people to a destination.
Yeah, and I think when you get to that place, so if you let's get even behind that, why that happens in the church. I think it happens because we have a view of Jesus, we have a view of life with God, and maybe religion. You would use that term, maybe of the goal of it is behavior modification.
Yep.
And the goal is, and really behavior modification to a point. And what I mean is, get me good enough to get into heaven. Even Christians who believe they are saved by grace,
Yeah.
right? There is a level of, well, that'll get fixed in eternity. So I just need to make sure I stay enough within the bounds. So when you take your thing, and I've heard people do this before, Jesus says, do not worry. So if you're struggling with anxiety, this is a sin issue. You need to just, you just need to
Stop
talk to
worrying.
God about that, confess your sin, and you'll move on. And it's not even to say that it's not, there are behaviors that come about because of people's mental health struggles, that the behavior that comes out of it, the consequence coming out, is a sinful thing.
Yeah.
But as you're saying, you got to back up behind that. And I think what Jesus came to do, and if we can look at, Jesus came, you might use the word holistic, right? Or for the whole person, right? That we are multiple dimensional beings. We are both spirit, which is what most people think religion is about. That's your spiritual life, right? The kind of inner you. You are also emotional. You have an emotional aspect. You are a intellectual being or a mental being, the thoughts that you think, but you're also a physical person. You have a physical body.
Right.
Jesus came to save all of those things. When Jesus saw a person who was couldn't walk, a crippled person, he didn't walk up and say, hey, look, that'll get taken care of in eternity.
Yeah.
He goes, I'm going to come up. I'll heal you. But there's this other thing you need too. Your sins are forgiven, right? He's doing both aspects because he cares about the entire person. On the sermon you preached on mental health, right? There was a demon possession. So there's a spiritual aspect, but it's causing both emotional and physical and social.
Yep.
All of those are
All the
dimensions of it. Jesus goes, I want to heal all of those things. And if we can get ourselves a view of Jesus and a view of what life with God is that goes beyond heaven one day, right? And it goes to God is interested in my entire being. Well, it becomes easier to now go, well, let's figure out what does it look like to have the thoughts Jesus would have, right? And that goes to the point you were talking about of, I have this reality that's been warped because of the small little thoughts I think that become bigger thoughts that I think.
Yeah.
If I could begin thinking Jesus-like thoughts about myself and
Mm-hmm.
about my life. That changes,
Yeah.
but that takes practice. It takes habituation
Mhm.
or a habit forming.
And
Right.
it's more than just the thoughts too. It's the experiences that
Sure.
you have lived
Mhm.
underneath for your whole life. I mean,
Mhm.
I've already mentioned trauma, but when you have grown up in a home where there was, a message that was given to you about your worth or what was worthy about you, and it's distorted from what the picture of it distorts the image of God within you, and that's all you know,
That's right.
then you're only living out the reality that you were handed. And so again, it's more than just thinking different thoughts.
Mhm.
It's actually somebody having to almost help you unlearn and then relearn
Right.
all the stuff. And
Right.
that's not a, hey, sit with me for an hour and I'll teach you all the things and then
That's
you go
right.
and fix it. I say this all the time when somebody starts a counseling journey is I say, look, this is not a pill you take. This is a process you enter into
Mm-hmm.
where all we're trying to do is for you to see some progress.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can walk out of here and then come back the next time and say, you know what, this week was a little bit better than last
That's
week.
right.
Or even if it's a small, tiny thing, well, then now we're on track and
That's right.
we're maybe shifting some of those identity issues or some
Mhm.
of those self-worth issues that you're dealing
Mhm.
with, or just or maybe we're actually pulling out some of the trauma that's being stored in you.
Right.
That and you're starting to redefine that and change it a little bit so that you can see it for what it really is. So
Yeah, I think when it comes down to, for the church, I do think the over spiritualization is the end reason most people don't. I think we do think not just about heaven, but we really believe that if Jesus has the power to heal, we should be able to pray and fix things, and I shouldn't have
Yeah.
to.
Mhm.
I shouldn't have to deal with it in the way that people who aren't Christian.
Yeah.
Right.
I get that they have to deal with it that way, but I shouldn't have to deal with it in that same way, and that it's almost wrong and not of faith for me not to trust Jesus to help me get out of this situation.
Sure.
And I don't even talk about the church in general. I think individual Christians feel that kind of thing. Other people seem to be able to handle this. Why can't I handle it?
Mhm.
Do I not have enough faith? Is there something wrong with me?
Or I'm weak.
I'm weak,
Mhm.
and I keep dealing with this particular problem, whatever it is. And I said when we were talking about this at another meeting that I think the way that the church is currently dealing with mental health, if you look back historically, we dealt with medical
Mhm.
advances in the same way. Unfortunately, we thought, those aren't talked about in the scripture, and we didn't know a whole lot about it, and so we stood back, and it had to take a while for things to get.
Mhm.
And honestly, even in the professional world, this area of mental health is coming of age. I think,
Oh, yeah.
these
Mhm.
days.
Mhm. I
And-
use that image with clients all the time of that here's another topic, but it's similar to what you're talking about. A lot of Christians frown on, medications
That's right.
that you take for mental health. And they think that's a sign of weakness, or you shouldn't have to have those kinds of things. And I'll be the first to tell you, I'm not a fan of just, throwing medicine at people
Sure.
either.
Sure.
But, and this is what I tell people all the time, as I say, if you had a broken leg,
Mhm.
and you would say it would be malpractice for me to tell you to stand up and walk on that leg.
Right.
Right.
You would first, I couldn't send you to any kind of therapy because you could not participate in the therapy because of your
Correct.
broken leg.
Right.
I
Correct.
said, so what I would have to do first is I'd have to get a cast on there or some type of boot to help give you the support you need to maybe eventually stand on that leg,
That's right.
participate in the therapy, gain strength so that it would heal. Then you take it off.
Mhm.
I see medication as the same way.
Mhm.
Is in order for you to participate in the therapy, for some people, not all,
Mhm.
but for some people, they get to a point, and we always work. We start with the therapy, and we see how it goes. And if we just can't get any ground, then we might say, well, maybe we need to get some support,
Mhm.
and we step in and get some support, and then maybe the therapy can actually start working.
Right.
Right.
I think in the church world, we've, like you said, we think, well, a prayer ought to take care of it,
Right.
or your faith ought to just get strong enough to take care of it.
Right.
And that's just an unrealistic expectation for some people because of what they've been through.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's unrealistic in the way that the human person grows and develops and learns. I think the same problem comes to the way that we deal with sin in people's life. I think people have habitual sins in their life, right? Whether it be something sexual, losing my temper all the time. And it's not particularly a mental health issue. It's just I'm dealing with sin in my life. And the answer we have is stop it.
Yeah.
Right.
Just stop it. Or this is what we call accountability. We call accountability. You go to a person, tell them every time you do the bad thing, and the shame of telling another person is going to fix it for you. But what ultimately works in it, and a psychologist, Henry Cloud, I noticed I think we have the book that he's doing as one of our Right Now media.
My small group is doing it right now.
Yeah. So that whole thing, I heard him speak on this maybe 6-7 years ago when he defined accountability. He tells the parable Jesus tells of the fig tree, where the guy comes, he's planted this fig tree, it's not producing fruit, and the guy who owns the tree said, well, let's just tear it up and throw it away. And one of the farmers comes in and goes, hey, how about we go and we dig around give me a year to dig around the soil, plant some new nutrients in the soil, and then we'll see if it goes. And he goes, that's a better image of what accountability is, which is I dig deep into a person's life and go, what is it that's actually causing you to struggle with lust the way you are, right? What is the thing? And we see this in 12-step groups, right? At some point, you have to take a fearless moral inventory where you really get to what are the things I've done and what's underneath that, right? And then you got to put new soil in. You got to put new thought patterns, new habits in. And then you got to give it time to actually say, let's see if this thing actually works and grows before we can say whether it's fruitful or not. Well, that's ultimately what we need in our spiritual life, even beyond mental health. If I want to see my marriage get better, I want to see sins in my life actually decrease, right? I want to grow that way. It's going to take me going in and looking at what are the things that I'm doing, not in the moment I'm tempted to sin, or not the moment those thoughts come into my head. What are the patterns of life I'm living under that allow those thoughts or those temptations to flower in my life instead of the truth of God or those kind of things? But what we do is we go, well, let's do a sermon on anger, and we'll just tell a bunch of people anger's bad, or sexual sin is bad, stop doing it. But then if we could have a way of viewing, hey, I might need to go life on life with a person.
Yeah, because the teaching is always on the back half.
Mm-hmm.
The front half is, and you mentioned, whatever sin issue I'm dealing with, might be an addiction, or it might be whatever that I can't seem to stop doing, or I can't seem to get motivated to do. Right there is the only way is you've got to use your image. You got to dig so far down deep that you figure out what is the pain that I'm medicating, because almost all of those things originate in pain. There's a feeling that I don't want to admit that I have, or there's a feeling I just don't want to feel. Sometimes it comes from just something that happened to me, or something got ingrained in me a long time ago. And so this habit developed around a masking of that.
Sure.
It's either to keep the feeling from coming up, or to just ignore it so I don't have to talk about it. Well, you got to take the mask away, that whatever that is medicating it, so that you get down underneath the soil and you bring it out and you put it on the table and you go, this is what we're dealing with.
Right.
And when a person finally sees this and even feel it, because they've been so afraid to feel it, and then you walk with them through that feeling, and then you help them understand that it won't kill you. You can do this. Now it's what I said a few weeks ago. It's out in the light. It starts to lose its power. Now I gain a little bit of confidence over, okay, I can actually go through this negative feeling that I've been running from or masking, and I have what I need to actually go through it. And then the more you do that, and you do it in tiny little increments,
right,
you gain confidence, you gain power, and now you're getting some victory over it.
That's right.
And then you start doing different, and that's when the teaching comes in. It goes, now here's what you do
right
in your life. But until you get this stuff uncovered, The teaching, like you said, throw a sermon series at it.
Right.
It's not going to work very well.
That's right. And there's a blessing too, and this is really what we try to do as a church is I have to teach the truth. You know, we've done that triangle. We've shown people of how spiritual life works. There's teaching, that's part of it. Then there's community. I got to get some people around me, right, to help me do this. And then the practice part, but the practice part is not just, okay, now I've heard the truth, I'm going to go do it. In our discipleship program, we're actually changing a couple of the practices this year. Steve Clark, who leads that, and I work on that together. And one of the things we do is we identify there are these things I'm giving away. We call them curses that I give away to the people in my life. And it's usually patterns of sin or some kind of harmful behavior, right, that I give away. And normally what we've done is we just identified it and said, okay, so here's the plan I'm going to follow. We agreed this year we actually needed 2 extra weeks. Normally we do month-long practices. We said we need 2 extra weeks to help people come up with plans that'll work. And the way that I talked about it when he and I were talking about it is there's someone in my life who has already told me what curse she's working on, and it's with her children. And she said, I often feel like I'm pretty harsh and critical on my kids. I say more harsh things than I mean to, you know, and not all the time, but sometimes when things are tense, that works that way. So she said, that's what I'm going to stop, is I'm going to stop doing that. And so I said, well, how are you going to do that? And she said, well, I'm just going to, you know, I'm going to pray better prayers in the morning and get those kind of things. And I said, okay, here are the questions you need to ask. I said, you need to ask, when does this happen the most?
Yep.
And so we started there. And it turns out, well, it's when we're leaving the house. All right, every time I'm leaving the house, they're not moving as fast as I want them to and those kind of things. Well, this person, who I love, and I think she'd freely admit, is always late herself. Okay, so transitions are tough for her. Well, now she's throwing kids on the plate. They're not moving very good. And so I said, so the issue is you already feel guilty for being late. Your kids are not moving at the speed you want them to. And then you start saying, why are you always doing this? Why are you acting this way? So I said, what if your practice is, I'm going to add 15 minutes to transition times. So your practice is every day, a transition that normally, instead of saying, hey, we're leaving the house in 5 minutes, everyone can get their shoes on. If we got to leave at 10 o'clock, we're starting leaving time at 9:45. And I said, and now you've given yourself the thing where you can go, all right, come on, go ahead and put those shoes on. It'll take a little bit longer. You know what I'm saying? Now,
It's margin.
It's margin. But what you're doing is you're backing up and saying the problem is not, you are not the kind of person who wants to say these harsh things.
Absolutely.
But what she feels is, I'm a terrible mom. Good moms don't say things like this to their kids. But if you give them that empowerment.
And behind that, she's frustrated. Good people don't show up late to everything.
Sure, yeah, I'm embarrassing. I'm
There's
embarrassed.
frustration behind that.
Yeah.
And so all I'm saying with that is, even within our church, we are trying to take this approach to, hey, you want to be the kind of person who says patient and kind things. I remember I said to one guy in one of these groups, if you're only getting 4 hours of sleep a night, that's a problem. Because if love is patient and love is kind, and you know you are angry and rushed and irritable when you lose sleep, getting sleep becomes a spiritual issue. It's not just a physical thing. It is something you got to figure out. Now, as I'm sure Jason can point out, there are people who, because of the anxiety they have or whatever, sleep becomes a problem. So maybe we need to back that up even more.
Oh, yeah.
But it's about that digging deep and figuring out, why is it I'm doing these things?
Yeah.
So then maybe another problem the church has with this, I just hear you talking it through, and we've talked about this. Maybe another reason is our theology is based on me and Jesus ought to be able to solve everything.
Correct.
Yes.
And that I don't want to have anybody help me dig beneath. I don't want to have to talk anything through. Me and Jesus ought to be enough.
Well, what I thought was interesting, we brought up the Henry Cloud book. I know in his teaching on it, he said, what accountability really looks like is letting other people borrow your strength or your whatever. So he said, there's this guy who, the thing he was talking to him about, he was holding him accountable for overindulging in food. And he said, this guy, he just calls me up and says, I ate a bunch of nachos tonight. I'm a terrible person, blah, blah, blah. And he said, so what's the problem this guy has? Well, he just wants to eat. He won't tell himself no. And he said, no, the problem is he's not disciplined. He has a lack of discipline. He goes, but you're the kind of person who does have discipline. Maybe if you came alongside and did this. And so I remember something along the lines of, he's like, they started, this guy and the other guy said, he said, I'll come to your house every day at this time. We'll go running together. He goes, you can't make yourself run, but you will do it with me.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a community aspect of you're not alone in this.
Right.
And
That's
in very
right.
much the way I know Jason does in his new path on career is that's what a counselor will do for you. They will come alongside you and go, hey, I have some wisdom, I have some knowledge just from being able to help other people. You can't see the practice you need, but we can do this together. And that's what I heard when you said the thing of life on life, we're doing this together.
Well, and any kind of good treatment plan that a counselor works with the client on, it shores up all of those spaces in their life. It says, if you want to, like you said, become more physically active,
Right.
and you're currently not getting it done on your own, well, let's find an environment. Let's find a
Right.
relationship. Let's find a scenario that we can now put you in that sets you up
Right.
to do the things that you say you want to do. It's not so much a want to problem. It's an environment problem.
That's
you
right.
know, and you said it very good, I thought, Nathan. You dive into, if you want to end a behavior, you start asking questions about the behavior. When does it happen?
Mhm.
When am I most
Who am I
susceptible?
around?
Who's around me? What's going on?
What do I feel?
What do I feel in the moment? What time of day is it? And you
Yes.
get all those things laid out on the table, and you start to realize, it's that is not the thing. There's all these other things that are feeding into it.
And it's often thoughts I'm having about things in
Yeah.
that time that I don't even realize I'm thinking in the
Mhm.
moment.
Exactly.
Expectations I had, something that,
Yeah.
Or past
Yeah,
experiences.
well, that's what I mean, past experiences.
Yeah, there's been a experience. That's one of the things I think I didn't realize until I was going through foster training and then having been a foster parent and adoptive parent. How much of it is not even they're not even thought patterns people have. Trauma gets stored up in your body.
That's right.
They
That's
become
right.
embodied reactions you have. You don't even know
Yep.
you're dealing with it. And my wife and I had just recently heard from our children's counselor when we were talking. They were explaining to us that there's now this, there's probably an actual term for it, but I call it secondary PTSD. But it's like a transfer that when you are in an environment where you're helping people who have a lot of trauma and their reactions, some of it gets a little bit into you. And I'd never really experienced it until there have been some things in our family life and our history. When the weather changes a certain way, I feel in my body, I'm more tense right now.
Mhm.
And it took me a while to realize, that's because this is the time of year that thing was going on.
Mhm.
This is the time of year this thing happened. There was no thought that led me to think that. My body started to feel, it's fall. This is is the time you need to protect yourself.
Your amygdala stores that
Right.
because it's trying to keep you safe, and it
Mhm.
knows that when that happened last time, I was not safe, and I have to
Yep.
protect myself. It's all baked in. So
Mhm.
that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
And I just think all of that's a part of us having, and as believers, whether we even currently are struggling with mental health problems, having a holistic view of the person and what God is doing, of this idea that God cares about my body.
Mhm.
He gave me, we teach our daughters this all the time, even just with eating healthy foods or exercising or just taking care of their body. We say, your body is a gift. God has given this to you. It's important. This idea, I'll get a new body in heaven that'll take care of. That's not respectful of the gift God gave. My mind is a gift,
Mhm.
right? And there are things that happen sometimes in my life that I can't control and that I now have to deal with. They're not my fault, but they are now my responsibility.
Mhm.
Having all of that thought of Jesus wants to do something with all of that. And it's not just teach me the truth so I can get to heaven and I can stop doing bad things. Jesus cares about you.
Mhm.
And I think that allows us then when we meet someone who has mental health problems, or if we ourselves start to struggle, or if it's just sin in our life that we have to address, all of that gets better when I realize Jesus cares about it all. And he is the answer. Because even what you're doing with therapy, you're bringing Jesus into that because Jesus wants to be a part. I don't mean you're coming in and saying, let's pray in the name of
No.
Jesus. You are in your body, in your mind, because you have the Spirit of God in you. That's a part of all of this.
Yes.
So
I'm sure we will talk more about this in the future. But
Probably.
I'm confident.
We
yes.
have run out of time.
Okay.
Good time.
All right.
So fastest 30 minutes that I've spent all week.
No, there you go.
So, all right. So that was our attempt at creating our own question.
And if you liked it, then stop sending questions.
Then don't say nothing. But if you didn't, or you'd like to redirect,
We would really appreciate it.
we
if you send
would.
questions.
Link is in the description. Send us in a question, and who knows? Maybe yours will show up next week. See you next time.